Hello, I'm Esther Gitu-Yuwat. It's Wednesday, June 21st. This is Africa 54. Parents in Western Uganda give DNA samples to help authorities identify their children whose bodies were badly burned during an attack at a school. Journalist Aden Abdulahi talks about overcoming challenges growing up in Kenya's Dadaab refugee camp, where he fled after declining recruitment by the al-Shabaab militant group in Somalia. And in our tech report, a US-based company uses AI-enabled solar mini-grids to deliver 100% renewable power for homes, businesses, and most people in rural areas of Africa with no access to electricity. All of this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. We begin our broadcast in Sudan, where heavy clashes broke out between rival military factions in several parts of Sudan's capital on Wednesday as a 72-hour ceasefire that saw several reports of violations expired. Shortly before the truce ended at 6 a.m. local time, fighting was reported in all three of the cities that make up the wider capital around the confluence of the Nile, Khartoum, Bahri, and Omdurman. Sudan's army and the paramilitary rapid support forces have been battling each other for more than 2 months, wreaking destruction on the capital. The fighting has also triggered widespread violence in the western region of Darfur, causing more than 2.5 million people to flee their homes. The Ugandan military says it has rescued 3 of the 6 students who were kidnapped by Islamist fighters when they stormed the Mpondwe Lubirira Secondary School in western Uganda last week and massacred 42 people, mostly young students. Uganda's People's Defense Force spokesman Brigadier Felix Kulaije told VOA's Douglas Mpuga that military also rescued a woman and her 2 children kidnapped near the school. Meanwhile, parents of children missing after the attack are giving DNA samples at a local police station because many of the bodies recovered are badly burned to be identified. Here's David Doyle with more.
At a police station in western Uganda, parents wait to give DNA samples. Their children are missing after a brutal attack on the Lubirira Secondary School in Mpondwe last week. It was one of Uganda's worst massacres in recent decades. A boys' dormitory was set alight. In a dormitory for girls, victims were hacked to death. 42 bodies have been recovered. Mpondwe District Police Commander Tai Ramadan said many were burnt beyond recognition.
We are getting samples from the relatives of the missing students, such that we can identify the body to the family, to the right family, such that the bodies can be taken for decent burial.
Authorities say 6 students were also abducted by attackers they believe to be fighters from an Islamic State-affiliated group, the Allied Democratic Forces. It's based across the border in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Among those at the police station was Solomon Mulekia, looking for his missing daughter.
So far, as a parent, mine is not yet found. So I'm still waiting. I'm there in the safe space, whether the rebels have taken her or we don't know whether they have killed her in the way.
On Monday, authorities said they had detained for questioning 20 suspected collaborators in the attack, including the school's head teacher.
David Doyle of Reuters filed that report. For more on Uganda's students' attack, I'm joined live via Skype from Kampala, Uganda, by Bulama Bukarati, Vice President of Programs, Bridgeway Foundation, and Senior Fellow at the Extremism Policy Unit, Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. Mr. Bukarati, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you for having me.
A very unfortunate tragedy happening just when Bridgeway Foundation is trying to weaken the ADF forces. Did you see it coming?
Unfortunately, this is a tragedy, and I think it is good for us to take time and reflect that these are not just statistics. These were real children, young men and women who were massacred in a way that is so horrific. And the parents of these children looking at their distraught faces that you showed in the report, you just can't help your heart breaking. Unfortunately, this attack is unfortunate as it is, but it isn't surprising, because the ADF has been committing similar attacks in Congo in particular. If you look at 2021, for example, there have been 40 different attacks in which more than 10 people were killed. The same thing last year, that's 2022, there have been 23 mass massacres in which over 10 people were killed, and the total number of people killed in 2021 were 715 people in those in those 40 massacres. And in the 23 massacres we saw last year, 444 people were killed. And therefore, it is not surprising, even though it is an unfortunate attack. Even earlier this year, March this year, 53 people were killed by the ADF in eastern Uganda. So we have been in eastern Congo, and so we have been seeing these kinds of attacks, and therefore it is not completely surprising.
So, Mr. Bulama, knowing what you know, what lessons can we learn from this attack?
I mean, the biggest lesson for me is that the ADF is not just a Congolese problem. It is a regional problem. This attack was on Uganda, but even before now, we have seen an attack in November 2021 on Kampala, bombings, 3 coordinated bombings. There was an attempted bombing in Rwanda. There was another attempted bombing in Tanzania. And therefore, the ADF is not just a Congolese problem. It is a regional problem. And therefore, countries across the region, as well as governments, especially Western partners and governments, need to come together in order to fight the ADF. The more we allow them to grow and fester on Congolese soil, the more they would threaten the region and the more they would target Western interests and nationals, unfortunately.
Mr. Bulama, thank you very much for your insight. Bulama Bukarti is Vice President of Programs, Bridgeway Foundation, and Senior Fellow at the Extremism Policy Unit, Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. A Rwandan national, Fulgens Kayishema, accused of ordering the deaths of 2,000 people seeking refuge in a church during the 1994 Rwandan genocide, has abandoned his bail application in South Africa and will seek asylum, according to South African prosecutors. Kayishema, 62, is a former police officer accused of participating in the Rwandan genocide and was arrested last month under a false name on a grape farm outside Cape Town. He had been on the run since 2001 when the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda indicted him for the 1994 genocide in the country. He has denied any involvement in the violence, but said he was sorry for the killings. Kayishema currently faces 54 charges in South Africa, most of them immigration-related. The theme of the World Refugee Day 2023 was Home Away from Home, according to the UN Refugee Agency. But for millions in the eastern DRC, this hope is still very much a dream, as their lives have been shattered by violence, displacement and hunger. Paul Ndiho has more.
According to the World Food Programme, WFP, since March 2022 alone, 5.7 million people have been displaced in the eastern provinces of North Kivu, South Kivu and Ituri. WFP spokesperson for Southern Africa, Thompson Piri, told journalists in Geneva.
Eastern Congo is a classic example of a forgotten crisis. The region has all the ingredients of a humanitarian catastrophe: conflict, constrained access, climate crisis, and a crippling funding shortage.
Today, because of the lawlessness associated with 120 non-state armed groups, the UN agency has struggled to deliver vital relief to vulnerable communities where negotiating access is an ongoing challenge.
The east of the country is grappling with active non-state armed groups, aggravating the ongoing cycle of violence, triggering massive population displacement, and exacerbating an already fragile humanitarian situation.
their displacement had driven food insecurity, as people were driven off their land and left unable to grow food. The latest projections indicate that 25.8 million people in the DRC will face acute food insecurity in 2023. So many are going hungry despite the country's natural wealth, as most communities also face the risk of hunger as WFP ramps up assistance to 3.6 million people over the next 6 months. So far this year, only 15% of the 870 million required for humanitarian response in the country has been sourced. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
Aden Abdulahi fled Somalia after declining an invitation to join the al-Shabaab militant group. He grew up in Kenya's Dadaab refugee camp, where he had to overcome many challenges. Today, he is a journalist working with the UNHCR-supported refugee community radio station, Radio Gargar. Juma Majanga speaks with Abdulahi about his work and his dreams.
In a shipping container at one of 3 refugee camps in northeastern Kenya, Aden Abdulahi is presenting the breakfast show on Radio Gargar. The 25-year-old Abdulahi says his journalism career is a dream come true. Forced into exile as a teenager after rejecting a call to join al-Shabaab, Abdulahi says he aspired to tell the stories he has seen while living in the camp.
I have seen a lot of, media gaps in the Dadaab refugee camps. There is a lot of stories out there, but nobody, is covering the stories. And so that's why I tried, to bridge that gaps and, to become a voice of the voiceless.
Abdulahi is among the more than 600 refugee youths who have benefited from a technical vocational training program offered by the Norwegian Refugee Council in the camps.
Most youths, once they are able to complete primary education, high school, they have limited opportunity in terms of accessing tertiary education, more so the university. So as NRC, we opted to venture into providing technical skills targeting the youths. And in these skills, the skills that we provide are more of market-driven skills, where we do the market assessment, and then we look at what are the opportunities that are within the Garissa as a whole, and also within the Dadaab. And this is where we came up with different courses that we provide to youth, both girls and boys.
Congolese refugee Eli Hamuli, a digital journalist and aspiring TV producer, is also a beneficiary of the program.
Being a refugee, it doesn't limit one's ability. I believe that the ability that one is having, who is, let's say, a Kenyan by nationality, and you as a refugee, the only difference that you have is only about the status, but about every other things, I believe that we are same.
On the International Day of the African Child, Aden Abdulahi covered a celebration event at the refugee camp. The 25-year-old, popularly referred to by his listeners as Mutile, meaning a great person in Somali, says his joy comes from highlighting stories about his community in the camps. Leila Halif, a Somali refugee and a listener of Gargar Radio, says the station has become a link between the refugee community and the humanitarian agencies operating in the camp.
I listen to the station to get all the news and information about what is happening in the camps, especially on activities of the humanitarian organizations operating here. It is the link between us and the organizations.
Kenya hosts more than 500,000 refugees and asylum seekers, mainly from Somalia and South Sudan. In 2021, the country passed a law seeking to promote social integration of refugees by allowing them to access employment opportunities. Trained refugees like Abdulahi hope the skills they have acquired will help open more doors of opportunity for them. Juma Majanga for VOA News, Dadaab Refugee Camp, Kenya.
Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu made sweeping changes to the defense forces on Monday, forcing out the security chiefs and the head of police less than a month after taking office. Timothy Obiezu has more.
Esther, it's not unusual for Nigerian leaders to sack service chiefs and recruit new ones, but this is different. President Bola Tinubu, during his inaugural speech on May 29th, promised to hit the ground running, and that's exactly what it appears to be. Authorities did not give any reason for the sudden removal in a statement confirming the changes late Monday, but Tinubu also retired the police boss and the head of Nigeria's customs services. He also dissolved the boards of ministries, departments, and agencies. Since assuming office 3 weeks ago, Tinubu has removed expensive fuel subsidy, unified exchange rates, signed many bills, and has been holding meetings with business magnates. Some Abuja residents say they are impressed so far with the president's decisions.
It's a good one. It's been long we've been expecting that, even from the past government. For him to start with that shows that he knows what he is going to do.
During the campaign, they were saying Muslim tickets. But he have just proved that it's not about Muslim ticket. He have balanced the equation about Muslim ticket by picking Igbo, Yoruba, Hausa, the fuel issue. If you can be able to, you have removed the subsidy for the fuel. If you can be able to at least put 2 refineries working, so it can help bring down the price of the fuel, we will be happy.
Earlier this month, the president suspended the central bank governor, Godwin Emefiele, and soon afterwards suspended the head of Nigeria's Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, for misappropriation. But some supporters of these officials have been criticizing the president, saying the suspension raises doubts that Tinubu will fight graft. Nigeria has been struggling to stem widespread insecurities affecting many states of the country, and the new appointments come days after a former militant leader accused the Nigerian security forces of playing a huge role in siphoning crude oil from the country's Niger Delta region. Timothy Obiezu for VOA News, Abuja, Nigeria.
Thanks, Tim. Still to come in our tech report, using AI-enabled solar mini-grids to deliver renewable electricity to rural areas of Africa. Stay with us.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees says 110 million people have had to flee their homes because of conflict, persecution, or human rights violations. The wars raging in Ukraine and Sudan have made the crisis worse. Most of the world's refugees are hosted by countries in Africa and Asia, not in Europe or North America. Also, US President Joe Biden came into office promising to fix America's broken refugee program. What has he accomplished in the last 2 years? Join me, Heidi Adams, and my guests this week on Straight Talk Africa.
In other news, South Africa's biggest bank by market value said on Wednesday its non-performing loan ratio would stay below its target range as it maintains its conservative lending stance. South Africa has some of the continent's biggest banks. And 4 police officers in Kenya were killed when their vehicle overran an improvised explosive in northeast of the country that police suspect members of al-Qaeda-linked al-Shabaab laid on the road. The incident happened late on Tuesday when the vehicle was escorting a convoy of buses between the towns of Banisa and Mandera, prompting another security team from Banisa to respond. Former U.S. President Donald Trump's indictment over his handling of classified materials is sowing some divisions among Republicans. Veronica Balderas Iglesias has a wrap on some of the statements made over the weekend.
Even as former President Donald Trump pleaded not guilty last week to mishandling classified documents, his latest indictment continues to spur heated debates among members of his own party. Republican presidential candidate and former prosecutor Asa Hutchinson told ABC's This Week show that Trump should drop out of the presidential race.
Whenever you've got these serious allegations against you, whenever you've got the challenge of multiple different investigations during the course of the next year is not fair to the country, and certainly it's not fair to the party that wants to get this country back on track.
Interviewed by NBC, former Vice President Mike Pence, who's also running for president, questioned why his competitors in the Republican primaries presume Trump will be found guilty.
Look, all we know is what the president has been accused of in the indictment. We don't know what his defense is. We don't know if this will even go to trial. It could be subject to a motion to dismiss.
Appearing on CNN, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Republican Mike Turner, underscored the importance of letting the legal process move forward.
I'm certainly not going to defend the behavior that is listed in that complaint, but they're going to have to prove it.
President Joe Biden, who began campaigning this weekend for re-election, has declined to comment on Trump's legal challenges. Biden is abiding by the firewalls that protect the investigation, explained Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse on ABC.
He does not do business with Attorney General Garland. He does not speak to him about criminal-related matters. And second, Garland is firewalled off from this prosecution because he's appointed a special counsel, and his ability to engage with special counsel is extremely limited.
President Biden is himself under investigation for allegedly mishandling classified documents. But even if found guilty, he might not face charges, since historically the Justice Department's position has been to not indict sitting presidents. Veronica Valderas Iglesias, VOA News, Washington.
It's time for our tech segment, and joining us is our tech reporter, Paul Ndiho. Hello, Paul.
Thank you, Esther. In Africa, most people in rural areas have no access to electricity or are entirely cut off from the power grid. Many resort to polluting energy sources like kerosene lanterns or generators. Husk Power Systems, a US-based company, uses its AI-enabled solar mini-grids to deliver 100% renewable power to off-grid rural communities in East Africa and West Africa. For more, I spoke to William Brent, Chief Marketing Officer, Husk Power Systems, based in Barcelona, via Skype.
Welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you so much, Paul. Great to be here.
What is Husk and what are you guys doing in Africa?
The company essentially created a category of decentralized renewable energy systems called mini-grids. And we use solar panels, biomass gasification, and batteries that generate electricity. And then we also set up distribution poles and transmission lines. And essentially we go into unelectrified or poorly electrified communities in rural Africa. And bring those communities electricity for the first time, plus, in addition to the electricity, an assortment of energy services that we also provide.
When you talk about rural Africa, can you be a little bit specific?
There's about 1 billion, maybe 1.2 billion, I think, people in all of Africa. About half of those people are still unelectrified, and they all live in rural areas. Some in peri-urban, but mostly rural areas. So we're talking about 600 million people, 500 million people without electricity, and that's across sub-Saharan Africa primarily. So, any place outside of a main urban center, that would be peri-urban or rural. These are essentially unelectrified communities, and have been so for decades, and reliant entirely on kerosene or on diesel generators for any power that they do have. These are largely agrarian communities with large farming, mostly farming activities, agriculture, but also, many large towns, villages that have a fair amount of economic activity, small retail shops, etc.
Any specific countries that you've invested in so far?
So 2 so far, Tanzania and Nigeria. Nigeria being the largest unelectrified country, the largest unelectrified population in sub-Saharan Africa, about 90 million people. So almost half of the population of Nigeria is without access to any electricity. Tanzania's got a better rate of electrification, but still a huge population that's unelectrified. And then we're also looking at other countries in sub-Saharan Africa, you have countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is about 60 million people unelectrified, Ethiopia, and many other countries, Madagascar, Mozambique, Angola, Mali, Francophone Africa in the West also.
What does it take for somebody to tap into your mini-grid?
In Nigeria, the case of Nigeria, we're importing solar panels, smart meters, inverters, etc. The things you need to actually run one of these mini-grids. And then what we do is offer our services to people on a pay-as-you-go basis. So all of our connections are smart metered, so we can monitor how much energy is being used by any particular customer, whether it's a business customer or a household. And we work with our customers to help them understand, based on their income, based on the types of appliances they may already have in their home or the ones that they want to buy, how much electricity they would need. And then we at the beginning of each month, assuming that we connect them to our mini-grid, they pay a fee.
How are you bringing AI into the mix here to supply electricity?
With the role of technology and artificial intelligence in our business model is really, really important. You can imagine that we're building mini-grids in parts of countries that are hard to reach. For example, in Nigeria, to get from Abuja, where our country office is, to the sites that we've electrified so far, it's a 5 to 6 hour drive. Because it's hard to get to them, it's also can be very expensive to service them unless you're able to automate your operations as much as possible. And that's where digital solutions like IoT, artificial intelligence and machine learning, smart metering, these become critical aspects to our ability to scale our operations in a cost-effective, capital-efficient way. If we don't use AI, for example, to help with demand load profile and managing that load profile, we have to instead use people to do that, or other means to do that. It becomes expensive to the point where operating the mini-grid doesn't become viable over time, right? So the whole focus of digitization is to drive our costs down as much as possible, to bring that levelized cost of energy, the cost of energy to, ultimately our goal is to be around 20 cents per kilowatt hour.
Thank you so much for your time, William.
Paul, it's been a pleasure. Great to see you.
William Brent, a Chief Marketing Officer, Husk Power Systems, spoke to us from Barcelona, Spain. That's today's Tech Report. Back to you, Esther.
Thanks, Paul. Be sure to join Paul Ndiho every Wednesday right here for another tech segment on Africa 54. And that wraps up our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.